All right, so get this. We're diving into Memhash, this mobile game, on Telegram that claims you can mine cryptocurrency on it. Pavel Durov himself praising the app. It's pretty wild, right?
Yeah, it's definitely caught some attention, for sure. So basically, it's a Telegram mini app that simulates cryptocurrency mining. You can earn these in-game tokens by mining blocks. And it uses a system pretty similar to Bitcoin's proof of work. So you're solving these computational puzzles on your phone to earn rewards.
So like I just fire up the app, tap start mining, and suddenly my phone is like a mini crypto mine. Is it actually using my phone's processing power for this?
It is. Yeah, it's simulating that whole energy-intensive process of real crypto mining. But you're earning these Memhash tokens instead of Bitcoin. The first person to solve the puzzle for a block wins the block reward, but there's also this built-in mining pool element to it as well.
Oh, interesting. A mining pool. So that means even if I'm not the first one to like crack the code,
Yeah.
I can still earn something.
Right, exactly. You earn shares for contributing to the solution, even if you don't solve the entire block yourself. It makes it a little bit more accessible, I think.
Yeah.
For people who don't have the, latest, greatest phone or whatever.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about these Memhash tokens. How many are there? How are they distributed? Lay it on me.
Okay, so there's a fixed supply of 1 billion tokens spread across 1 million blocks. And it starts with a reward of 500 tokens per block. But the reward actually increases over time. They also have this dynamic difficulty adjustment too.
Wait, so it gets harder to mine as more people join, just like a real crypto network?
Precisely. Yeah, the algorithm adjusts the difficulty every 10 blocks to keep things balanced, no matter how many users are joining. The rate of new blocks that are being generated stays pretty consistent.
Clever. And what about this halving thing I saw mentioned in the documentation?
Ah, yes. That's where the mining pool gets really interesting. Because over time, the portion of the reward that goes to the person who actually solves the block decreases. And the majority of the reward ends up going to the mining pool participants.
The longer the game goes on, the more important that mining pool becomes.
That's fascinating. It seems like they're really emphasizing collaboration, which is kind of different from that, like, every miner for themselves mentality that you sometimes see,
Yeah.
Does this actually make it a fairer playing field then?
It's designed to. Whether it truly achieves that is debatable.
Yeah.
But we can dive into some of those potential downsides a little bit later.
Okay, good point. But before we get into all that, mining crypto is notorious for using tons of electricity. Does Memhash just like completely drain your phone battery? It's a good question and a legitimate concern. So to address that they have this energy mechanic, it limits how much you can mine at once, so no one can like dominate early on. And it encourages people to kind of keep coming back to the game instead of just like running it 24/7.
Hold on, so you're telling me there's actually a limit to how much I can mine? How often does this energy replenish?
It replenishes over time naturally.
Yeah.
But you can also boost it. This is where it gets a little bit tricky because they have these in-app purchases using their stars currency.
Wait a minute, so this like free crypto mining game isn't actually free?
Well, it depends on how you want to play it. You can mine without spending any money at all. But if you use those stars, you can unlock these advanced mining modes like turbo or supersonic. That can speed things up considerably.
Ah, so they've got like this free-to-play model with optional upgrades. It's clever from like a business perspective, but it does make you wonder about the earning potential for someone who chooses not to spend any money. So that raises the question, is this whole thing even legitimate? Like, are we talking about a genuine opportunity here? Or are we all just generating revenue for Memhash's developers?
Well, there's that Pavel Durov tweet, right? Where he talks about Memhash's success and profitability. That definitely lends some credibility to the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, if Durov's giving it a nod, there must be something there, right? I mean, it's not every day you see the creator of Telegram endorsing a game like this.
Right.
And the developers are claiming that a portion of those in-app purchases goes towards things like development and marketing and community support. They seem to be pushing this message of transparency and fairness. Yeah. And even discourage using bots or multiple accounts.
Interesting. So they're at least trying to create a level playing field, even with the in-app purchases. What about bans? Have you seen people getting kicked out of the game?
Bans seem to be pretty rare from what I've seen. And it seems to mostly be if people try to manipulate the system, like using bots or cheating. So it suggests they're at least serious about keeping things. Okay, so maybe they are on the up and up. But here's the million-dollar question. Is this actually worth your time? Can you make any real money from Memhash?
That's where things get a little bit murky, because right now, how these in-game tokens translate into real-world value is a complete unknown. There's no, they haven't said anything about listing the token on exchanges or anything like that.
So for now, you're basically playing for in-game currency with no guarantee that you can ever cash out.
Pretty much.
And that heavy reliance on in-app purchases raises some eyebrows.
Yeah.
Can the game be sustainable?
Yeah.
And can players actually profit? If the main source of revenue is people buying stars to mine faster, it makes you wonder.
Exactly.
If everyone's just buying upgrades to mine faster, where's the demand for the actual tokens coming from? It seems like it could turn into a bit of a closed loop.
It's a valid concern.
And let's not forget the practical stuff. This game needs you to leave the app running. What does that do to your battery life? What about, increased electricity costs from constantly charging your phone? Okay, so this like passive income stream isn't quite as passive as it might sound. You've got to actively use your phone and potentially spend some money on electricity. It's definitely a trade-off to consider.
Absolutely. But for people who are, interested in the mechanics of crypto mining, or even just looking for a new mobile game to try out, it could be an interesting experiment.
An experiment, you say?
I am.
That's an interesting way to put it. So is Memhash a legitimate way to earn crypto? Is it just a cleverly designed mobile game? Or is it a trend that's here to stay?
Well, to really understand that bigger picture, we need to explore this connection between mobile gaming and the world of crypto, and how this all ties into the Telegram ecosystem itself. Things are about to get even more interesting.
Oh, okay, I'm intrigued. So let's take a quick pause here. I think we've laid out the basics of Memhash, what it is, how it works, and some of the potential benefits and drawbacks.
Yeah, and we've raised some crucial questions too about, the game's long-term viability, the potential for profit, and even the ethical implications of these in-app purchases.
Exactly. So what are your initial thoughts so far? What's standing out to you? We'll pick up the conversation part 2, but for now, let all this information sink in. We'll be back in a flash.
What I find really fascinating about this whole thing is how Memhash kind of plays into this idea of easy money that surrounds crypto. It's almost like this digital gold rush in a way.
Yeah, I can see that. There's this allure of
Yeah.
getting in early on something big.
Yeah.
Especially with all the, crazy crypto success stories we've seen. But like you were saying earlier, there are definitely some potential downsides to consider too. You got to think critically about this and not get swept up in the hype.
Right, exactly. Crypto is still relatively new.
Yeah.
And unregulated. There's always going to be risks involved.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit here and talk about the actual user experience. We've covered the mechanics and the tokenomics, but what's it actually like to play Memhash?
So from what we can gather from the sources, it's a pretty simple game. Almost minimalist in its design. There's basically just one button, start mining. And once you hit that, you can see various stats as the app is kind of crunching these numbers in the background, using your phone's processing power.
So it's not like those flashy mobile games. With tons of graphics and complex gameplay, you're basically just letting the app do its thing while you go about your day.
That's the idea, yeah. It's meant to be passive, running in the background. You don't need to constantly be interacting with it.
So it's kind of like you're setting up this mini mining operation on your phone.
Yeah.
And just letting it run.
That's a good analogy. But you have to remember, it's still using your phone's resources, so that can impact battery life and performance.
Right. Those are important factors. Speaking of which, the documentation mentions visible rewards. So how do you actually see what you're earning?
So the app shows you your earnings in real time, both for blocks that you solve individually and your share of the mining pool rewards. You can track your overall token balance, your energy levels, and just your progress in general.
So even though that actual mining process is happening in the background, they've still kind of gamified it enough to keep you engaged.
Exactly. And that mining pool is a key part of that design too. Remember we talked about the halving mechanic earlier. As time goes on, more of that reward goes to the pool, so it encourages that collaboration and makes it possible for people with less powerful devices to learn something.
Right. So it's almost like they've taken this core concept of crypto mining and made it more accessible for the average person. In a traditional mining setup, you need specialized hardware and tons of computing power to compete. But here, anyone with a smartphone can potentially participate and earn something.
It is an interesting approach. They've attempted to democratize crypto mining to a certain extent. But we do have to acknowledge those limitations to that claim, given the concerns we've already talked about, like the in-app purchases, and the potential for an uneven playing field.
Very true. Okay, so let's get back to those in-app purchases. We know you can use stars to boost your daily energy. But what other upgrades are there, and how do they affect the gameplay?
So besides increasing your energy allowance, you can also unlock those advanced mining modes, like turbo and supersonic that we talked about earlier.
And those significantly increase your mining speed,
Yes, they do. According to the documentation, they can boost your speed by up to 20 times. So it's definitely tempting. But it also kind of feeds into that pay-to-win aspect that we need to be cautious of.
Right. Because if you're not willing to spend money on stars, you're potentially at a disadvantage compared to those who are. It creates this question of fairness and whether the game is really designed to benefit players in the long run.
Exactly. Could it become a scenario where only the big spenders, like the whales, as they're called in crypto, are the ones reaping most of the rewards? It could end up discouraging those more casual players. which goes against that whole idea of creating a more accessible and inclusive form of crypto mining.
It definitely highlights this tension between the ideals of decentralization and like the realities of market dynamics, even within something like a seemingly simple mobile game.
Absolutely. Now, you might be wondering about the social aspects of this. Like, is there a community? Can you interact with other players?
Yeah, it seems like most of what we've talked about so far is a pretty solitary experience. You're just mining on your phone, not really interacting with anyone else.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. Within the app itself, there aren't any like built-in social features or chat functions that we've seen, but they do have an active community on their official Telegram channel.
So that's where the real social interaction is happening.
Yep.
People are like sharing their results, discussing strategies, maybe even forming like teams or something.
It seems that way. Yeah, it's a space for players to connect, ask questions, share tips, stay updated on any news or announcements from the developers.
So even though the game itself might be solitary, there's still this sense of community happening outside of the app, facilitated by Telegram.
Precisely. That Telegram channel becomes like an extension of the game, a place where players can gather and share their experiences.
That's fascinating. It really highlights this unique role that Telegram is playing,
Yeah.
both as the platform for the game itself and as like the hub for the community.
Right.
Which of course brings us back to that Pavel Durov tweet.
Yes. You know, that tweet wasn't just about Memhash's success. It was also like a subtle endorsement of Telegram's platform and its ability to foster this kind of innovation.
Yeah, he's basically saying, look what you can build on Telegram. It's pretty clever marketing, actually.
It is. Memhash benefits from Telegram's reach and infrastructure. And in turn, Telegram benefits from the buzz and engagement that Memhash is generating. They're both playing their part in this little ecosystem.
It's a symbiotic relationship. Okay, so we've covered like the gameplay, the community, the role that Telegram plays in all this. But there's one like big question that keeps nagging at me. What happens when all the blocks are mined?
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room. So the documentation states that the mining phase will continue until all 1 million blocks are generated, which they estimate will happen around December 31st, 2024.
So like a little over a year from now, a finite time frame. What happens then? Does the game just end? What happens to all those tokens people have earned?
So according to the developers, upon completion of the mining phase, all the in-game tokens will be allocated to the miners through the TON blockchain, specifically as TON, Jeton.
Hold on. TON blockchain. Now we're getting into some more technical territory.
It is another layer to this whole thing. Yeah, we're stepping into the world of the Open Network, which is this blockchain project that's closely associated with Telegram. And Jetons are essentially tokens that exist on the TON blockchain.
Okay, so this seemingly simple mobile game is suddenly connected to this whole other blockchain ecosystem.
That's what the documentation suggests. Yeah, it implies that. Those in-game tokens you've been earning will somehow transition into like real crypto tokens on the TON blockchain. But the details of how this will actually work are still a bit fuzzy.
This is where it gets really interesting. We're no longer just talking about in-game currency. Now, these tokens could potentially have real-world value outside of Memhash.
It's a tantalizing prospect. But it also raises a whole new set of questions, like what will the value of those TON Jetons be? Will they be listed on exchanges and tradable? What happens to the Memhash app itself? Once that mining phase ends, does it just disappear?
And if the game is over, what incentive do people have to hold on to those tokens? What's the long-term vision here? I feel like these are all important questions that the developers really need to answer if they want people to trust them and buy into this whole concept.
I agree. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding this transition to the TON blockchain. It could be a brilliant move. Or it could completely fizzle out. We'll have to wait and see.
It's a fascinating twist to this story. What started as this like simple mobile mining game could end up being this like gateway to a much larger and more complex crypto ecosystem. But is the gateway worth entering? I think we should pause here for a moment and gather our thoughts.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground in this part. You know, the gameplay experience, the role of community, and this unexpected connection to the TON blockchain.
Yeah, and we've uncovered some potential red flags along the way too.
Yeah.
The heavy reliance on in-app purchases
Yeah.
and that uncertain future of those in-game tokens. In part 3, we'll try to make sense of all this and figure out what it means for you and whether Memhash is something you should actually consider getting involved with. So stay tuned. All right, so we've gone pretty deep on Memhash, the mechanics, the community, that surprising link to the TON blockchain. The question is, should you jump in? Is this something actually worth your time and energy?
That is the million-dollar question. I think, as with anything in the crypto world, there's definitely potential, but also risk. It really comes down to your individual circumstances and what you're hoping to get out of it, you know?
Yeah. I can see how someone might approach this as just like a fun experiment, you know? It's a pretty low-stakes way to kind of dabble in crypto mining without having to invest in like expensive hardware or anything.
Right, exactly. If you're thinking of it as a form of entertainment, knowing that you might not, you know, get rich, it could be a fun way to pass the time.
But for those who are hoping to turn their phone into like a money-making machine.
Well, like, they say there are no guarantees in crypto, and Memhash is no exception. You know, those in-app purchases. And the uncertainty around that TON blockchain transition raised some serious questions about whether players can actually profit in the long run.
It keeps coming back to that, doesn't it? If everyone's just buying stars to mine faster, who's left to buy the actual tokens? It seems like a system that could easily collapse on itself.
Yeah, it's a valid concern, and the lack of clarity about what happens after that mining phase ends only adds to the uncertainty. We don't know what those TON jetons will be worth, or if they'll even be tradable.
So many unknowns. What would you say are like the biggest red flags that potential players should be aware of?
The biggest one for me is that lack of transparency about the token's future. I think the developers need to be more upfront about how that transition to TON will actually work, what you can actually do with those jetons, and you know whether there will be any way to convert them to other cryptocurrencies or even like traditional money.
Transparency is key, especially in the crypto world. What else should people watch out for?
That heavy reliance on in-app purchases is definitely a major concern. It sets up this potentially uneven playing field, and it makes you wonder if the game is truly designed to benefit the players or just the developers.
Yeah, you've got to go into this with your eyes wide open. Be aware of how the game is structured, and don't get pressured into spending money that you don't feel comfortable with.
Absolutely. And don't forget those practical implications either, like the strain on your phone's battery, the potential increase in your electricity bill, the fact that you have to keep the app running constantly to mine. It's not a completely passive experience.
Yeah, it's easy to get swept up in the excitement of something new, but it's crucial to slow down and really think about those real-world costs before you dive in head first.
I completely agree. Now, we've talked a lot about the risks. To be fair, we should also talk about the potential upsides. What are some of the things that could make Memhash a worthwhile endeavor?
Well, that connection to the TON blockchain is definitely intriguing. If the developers actually deliver on what they're suggesting, and those jetons do become valuable and tradable, early adopters could be in a good position.
Right. It's like any early-stage crypto project. There's risk, but also the possibility of big rewards, and the fact that Pavel Durov himself has kind of given Memhash his stamp of approval adds another layer of intrigue to the whole thing.
It's not every day. The founder of Telegram publicly praises a project like this. It seems to indicate that he believes in what they're doing and sees it as a positive development for the Telegram ecosystem.
It's definitely a signal worth paying attention to. And beyond the potential for financial gain, there's also that educational aspect, even if you don't strike it rich. Playing Memhash could be a fun way to learn about crypto mining, proof-of-work mining pools, all these concepts that are often pretty hard to grasp.
Right, it's like a gamified introduction to the world of crypto. That could be really valuable for people who are curious but don't know where to start.
And let's not forget that community aspect either. Even though the in-app experience is solitary, that Telegram channel creates a space. For connection and shared learning, it can be really helpful to connect with other players, swap tips, and kind of get insights from people who are further along in the game.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that crypto isn't just about making money. It's also about community, learning and exploring new ideas.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground, the risks, the potential rewards, the unique role that Telegram plays in all this. Is Memhash the next big thing in crypto? Is it a flash in the pan? It's too early to say for sure.
We've definitely given you a lot to think about. But ultimately, the decision of whether or not to get involved is up to you.
Yeah. What I would say is this. Don't let FOMO, that fear of missing out, cloud your judgment. Do your own research. Weigh the pros and cons carefully. And decide if Memhash aligns with your personal goals and risk tolerance.
Solid advice. There are a lot of exciting opportunities in the crypto world, but also plenty of scams and failed projects. It's important to be discerning, to ask those critical questions, and not just jump into something blindly.
And even if Memhash doesn't turn out to be the next Bitcoin, the experience itself can still be valuable. You might learn something new, connect with some interesting people, and gain a deeper understanding of this rapidly evolving space.
So what's the final verdict? Is Memhash a legitimate way to earn crypto? Is it just a clever mobile game? Or is it just a fad that's going to fade away? I think the answer, as with most things in life, is it depends.
But regardless of what happens with Memhash, I think this convergence of gaming and crypto is a trend that's only going to accelerate. We're just at the beginning of what's possible, and it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out.
Well said. And as always, we'll be here to help you navigate all the twists and turns of the crypto world. Keep those sources coming.
Oh.
And we'll keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.